Rami reporting here from Belgrade, Serbia on March the 23rd, 2025. On the 24th of March 1999, we witnessed the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia.
My fellow Americans, today our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
Right behind me, you could see the former headquarters of the Ministry of Defense that got completely destroyed. NATO's campaign was triggered supposedly to come to the defense of Kosovo Albanians who were supposedly under imminent threat of genocide. This is quite curious since right now, on this day, there's a genocide happening in Gaza, yet NATO is nowhere near to be seen. This campaign was specifically meant to destroy Yugoslavia, deindustrialize it, which was once a superpower in the region where Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks were living peacefully together, Macedonians and beyond. Throughout this report, we're going to see interviews with Chinese citizens that came to pay their respects to the Chinese embassy, which was attacked by NATO. We're also going to speak to veterans, as well as see the different places that NATO has struck. We were told that NATO was attacking only military infrastructure, but we saw bridges, office buildings, residential properties that were destroyed to the ground, as well as radio TV stations. Tag along as we learn more about what happened in 1999 and how NATO, which is described in the West as being a defense association, be used as a tool of empire and destruction and of murder. While working on this report, I tried to wrap my head around why I found this story so compelling. And I really think that one of the reasons is because the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia really was the first domino. It was a training ground for what we saw in the early 2000s. The lack of accountability of the Americans in NATO kind of encouraged them to carry on with more war crimes, as we saw in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and Libya.
I am retired Colonel Branislav Anučić from Belgrade, Serbia. And if we speak about NATO aggression back in 1999, I can tell you several things about it, because at that time I was in active service. I had the rank of lieutenant colonel, and I worked in military intelligence. So I can speak volumes about this aggression. But for this occasion, I will just tell you one thing which may not be so well known to wider audience, and it concerns the use of depleted uranium ammunition, which was and still, I believe, still is forbidden by international law, but it didn't prevent NATO from using it. If I remember figures properly, they used more than 33,000 shells or artillery pieces with depleted uranium. Most of it was used on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, but on some other places also. 25 years after that, we have increased number of cancer people who with cancer diseases, especially in this area where this depleted uranium was used. I had the opportunity to be a defense attaché in my professional career. First, my mandate was in Hungary, and the second one in the States, and I was accredited to Canada also. While I was in Hungary, and it was just after the aggression, November 1999 till September 2003, I met my Italian colleague, and I gave him the list of areas in Kosovo and Metohija, which were mostly, to say so, polluted with depleted uranium, and asked him to warn his soldiers who were at that time already deployed, especially in that area, and that is area of Peć and Jakovica. I'm not sure that he understood me seriously, but after several years, the soldiers who served in this area were ill from cancer, and I think more than 10 of them passed away, and some of them who survived, they sued the Italian state for their illness. So this is crime of no boundaries and no measures, which we don't know how long it will last. And as we still have consequences of atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as we still have consequences of Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which had a malfunction back in 84-5. So we still have consequences, and we don't know how long we will have here in Serbia, and especially in Kosovo and Metohija, due to this NATO crime. So NATO is not defense organization whatsoever. It is criminal organization, and I'm sorry to say so, but there are so many facts to prove it.
I feel like this is a forgotten crime a bit, what NATO committed in Yugoslavia, specifically in Serbia. I mean, it really feels insane how people were left off the hook for these crimes that were committed. You're talking about people that are dealing with cancer. We're talking about thousands of civilians that were killed and wounded. What kind of justice can we ever hope for the people of Yugoslavia?
Unfortunately, we don't hope. We have no hope for justice, because still in the world the justice lays in power. If you are powerful, justice is on your side. What is more sad for us is that we have in Serbia now government who does not care about our consequences of this war. Can you imagine the building which is behind us, and it is building of our general staff, which was bombed during this NATO aggression. Our government is ready, and it's almost over. They gave it to the son of President Trump to build a hotel here. Instead of being a museum and a piece of pilgrimage for Serbian people, they gave it for no money at all. They will give it to Americans to protect their power here in Serbia. I'm very sorry. I didn't expect at my late age to feel so sorry to live in such, to say so, corrupted state which I am living now, and that is Serbia under this regime.
Right behind me is the ruin of Radio Television Serbia. On the 23rd of April 1999, during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, the NATO coalition targeted this TV station. We're often told that the purpose of the NATO campaign in Yugoslavia was to destroy the military infrastructure and to save the Kosovars from imminent genocide. But what strikes my curiosity is the necessity of striking the civilian infrastructure, such as this TV station. This TV station was broadcasting news for the Serbian people, the people of Yugoslavia. This specific strike, NATO didn't say it was accidental. It was a targeted strike that killed 16 Yugoslav citizens, as well as injured 16 more. And this was a deliberate attack to, well, NATO claimed that it was to stop the transmission of military coordinates, and that this building had some specific military applications to it. But the Yugoslav government at the time fully denied these claims, and it was only used for media civilian purposes. And then NATO emphasized that, well, this TV station was broadcasting propaganda during the height of the Yugoslav wars, or at least during the campaign in Kosovo. And it just reinforces again that the purpose of war is also to control the narrative and to stop people from being aware of what's going on. And that's why they deliberately attack TV stations, journalists, social media activists, people that are spreading the word, so that when the truth is killed or when the truth is hidden, it's easier to continue with these atrocities that NATO has committed here in Yugoslavia. The legacy of the NATO campaign in Yugoslavia is truly engraved in the memory of the people of Yugoslavia and today the people of Serbia. And as you could see is that many of these buildings that were targeted by NATO are kept as ruins or kept as some form of artifact to never forget and always remember the martyrs of NATO campaign in Belgrade in Yugoslavia. And as we could see is that all around the building of the Radio Television Serbia, you have newer constructions, yet this building is going to stand there probably forever as a memory of the fallen journalists, makeup artists, or the employees and workers of Radio Television Serbia. On May 7th, 1999, during the height of NATO's bombing campaign of Yugoslavia, the Chinese embassy was also attacked and bombed. During the attack, 3 Chinese citizens were killed and 20 more were injured. Now, right behind me is the premise of the former Chinese embassy of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, and there's also a little square to commemorate the victims, martyrs of NATO's attack on the Chinese embassy. Now, NATO's response very quickly said that it was a misfire or an accidental strike on the Chinese embassy. The Chinese are extremely skeptic of the response by NATO and their excuses by saying that it was an accidental strike. And what the Chinese say is that the NATO alliance or America wanted to test how China would respond to a strike on their sovereignty. I spoke to many Chinese people who came to pay their respects of the martyrs of the May 7th attack. And they've mentioned that they are extremely skeptical of NATO's position related to this attack. This place is fairly popular among Chinese tourists, and many of them say that this is the first place where they stop to pay their respects. And this is a fresh wound in the memory and legacy of the Chinese people that they're nowhere near for forgetting.
This is part of what I think is the national memory. I feel like it's inevitable that the Chinese want to visit here because it was like during the, I would say like one of the weakest moments of our country, and it actually really caused a surge in our country. So I think, yeah, I have to come here.
And the first response by NATO, they claimed that this was an accidental strike and that they didn't intend to attack the embassy. What do you have to say about this?
I don't think it was an accident. With what's going on in the world at the moment and the movement against Chinese dominion in trade, so to say, I think that was maybe a prerequisite to check out what's going to be China's reaction for something that will happen in the future, and the future is happening now. And again, we are waiting for Chinese reaction, just like then.
Because at that moment, I know all TV channels in Belgrade were shut down by NATO, and China is like one of the foreign forces that could be reporting what's happening locally. So I feel like it's a way for NATO to say, shut the f*** up.
Yeah. And many people in the West, I'm from Canada, we're taught that NATO is a defense alliance, that that NATO does not attack, that NATO just defends. I was in Bucharest just last week, and people kept pushing this narrative as well, that NATO is necessary for defense. I'm seeing here an embassy that was attacked. An embassy symbolizes Chinese land. How do you feel about NATO, and what role does it play in the world?
Well, I'm not going to answer from the perspective of a Chinese person because I'm from Serbia, so I can answer from my perspective. The fact that NATO claims to be the defensive alliance cannot stand because the NATO attacked Serbia in 1999. So whoever claims that the NATO is just the defensive alliance, that is not true. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We are far from North Atlantic. It was necessary for the defense against the Soviet Union. I don't think it's necessary anymore, at least not in the form that it currently operates. So I think that's basically my opinion on the NATO.
I feel like after the bombing, what NATO did was to allow China to enter the WTO, which helped China, especially Chinese economy, to grow a lot. And I think that's part of due to what happened here, because otherwise America would put more obstacles on that.
And you've mentioned earlier that this might have been an intentional strike to test what China would react, how China would react. Do you think that such an attack on Chinese sovereignty could happen again?
Not at this moment.
Why not?
I mean, because China is not like what it was. In the past 20 years, China's development is almost, I mean, I would say it's insane, because the life I am living now is completely different from the life my parents were living. And I mean, my grandparents, they couldn't be imagined oh my God, we're having such a good life now.
And there's a lot of Chinese people that come here.
Yeah.
We just saw a group of Chinese tourists, I assume, come here, pay their respects. There's 100 or so flowers right now. Where did you learn about this attack on the Chinese embassy?
Oh, it's in our textbook.
And the textbooks, and general Chinese people are usually fairly aware of it.
Yeah.
And as
I'm a tourist guide, and I'm guiding her.
Okay. So you're fairly well aware of that. Okay. And is there, as a tourist guide, is there anything more you can tell us about this this NATO attack on the Chinese embassy, or just NATO's bombing of Yugoslavia? Is there anything you could teach our audience?
Well, I'm not going to try to teach anyone. I mean, people can have their own opinion, and I'm not going to try to influence that. Why it happened? I'm just going to say it takes two to tango. So it's not just Yugoslavia's fault, of course. Just like it's never the fault of only one side in the war. It should not have happened, and hopefully it's not going to happen ever again in the future. Not just for Yugoslavia, but for any other country.
Now, I have a technical question for you because I'm curious to know, is that NATO had a list of no bomb coordinates, and that usually embassies were on this list of coordinates that cannot be attacked.
Okay, I did not know about it, okay.
So my question is that how can they, I mean, usually they cross-reference all the coordinates that they want to attack.
This is a very triggering question.
Yeah, and the question is that technically this embassy should have been on this no attack list, and clearly the attack still happened.
Well, can I move away from the subject just a bit? The moving train full of people should not have been on the list, and it has been bombed. 3 bridges in Novi Sad should not have been on the list, at least not all 3 bridges. They could leave one. And many other objects that were bombed should not have been on the list, but they were still bombed. So I think this is maybe the better answer to the question that you ask. Of course, the embassy should not have been there. Many people died, but not just the embassy.
Mm-hmm. Any final comments?
Cherish peace.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's still happening everywhere. Not here, but in other parts of the world. So I think this is I mean, wars are endless, but as long as we have peace, we have to cherish it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I fully agree with this. Throughout Belgrade and mostly all of Serbia, there's a huge anti-NATO sentiment, obviously because of the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia that happened in 1999, but also because NATO is seen as an occupying force in the Kosovo region of Serbia. After the war of 1999, or the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia of 1999, the Serb population of Kosovo was ethnically cleansed and expelled of the area of Kosovo. And now NATO is seen as a force that is stopping the Serbs from reuniting with their province of Kosovo. Kosovo plays a huge role in Serbian identity and Serbian history. It's where the Serbs first erupted and created their first kingdoms out of Kosovo. So the Serbian people are eager to reunite with their brothers in the south in Kosovo, and there has been heightened tensions in the last few years related to the Kosovar government. The ethnic Albanian government ruling over Kosovo has been putting restrictions on ethnic Serbs related to their way they want to identify. And the license plates and the identifications that they want to use, they don't recognize the Albanian occupation of Kosovo, and they prefer to use their Serbian identification. And this is why I believe in cities such as in Belgrade, we see a strong sentiment against NATO, against the EU, that has been playing a huge role in separating Kosovo from Serbia. On March 23rd, I attended a gathering in front of the former headquarters of the Ministry of Defense that was previously bombed by the NATO coalition in 1999. The purpose of the gathering was to protest the current government's plan to reconstruct the Ministry of Defense and gave the contract to Jared Kushner, who's intending to build Trump towers on the premise of the former Ministry of Defense. The Serbian population see this as a complete surrender of Serbia to the NATO coalition and see it as a symbolic form of submission. At that gathering, I met a gentleman of the name of Ilija Živković of the Communist Youth League of Yugoslavia. With him, we spoke about the history of Kosovo and what led the Americans to invade Yugoslavia in 1999. It seems like the pretext for the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia is that there was an imminent genocide that Yugoslavs were committing in Kosovo. Can you talk to us about what was going on in Kosovo in the 1990s?
Of course. The war in Yugoslavia, war that broke apart Yugoslavia, started in the beginning of the decade. It was based on ethnic foundations. Most bloody wars were in Croatia and Bosnia, and they ended in 1995. In that wars we saw a lot of bloodshed, a lot of ethnic cleansing on essentially every side. And separatism in Kosovo was existing during Yugoslavia even before that. But so-called Kosovo Liberation Army, the Albanian guerrilla terrorist group that initiated the war, was even designated as a terrorist organization by the United States government itself. But when they saw that they can't break Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Serbia and Montenegro by sanctions that were empowered during the Bosnian and Croatian war, they started aligning themselves with those Albanian terrorists and started funding them. Essentially what we see now in Syria and in many Middle Eastern countries, terrorists suddenly began to appear as freedom fighters.
Now, you call them terrorists. Can you talk to us more about the types of crimes that the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army was committing in Kosovo?
Of course, so-called Kosovo Liberation Army was committing horrific crimes. First, they began attacking on police and military forces in the region. And then they started harassing local Serbian population. Serbians were even by then minority in Kosovo, but Albanians had their autonomous province, autonomous self-governance, and essentially all rights that one nation should have in sovereign and democratic country. They started terrorizing and killing Serbian civilians. There are even evidence of Albanian terrorists being involved in human and organ trafficking on international level, as on an international criminal theater, you know. So Kosovo Liberation Army started receiving weapons, started receiving funds and logistics from US through Albania, through neighboring nations that NATO had forces in. And they essentially became a full-blown guerrilla warfare and war in Kosovo in 1998. What escalated it was so-called massacre in Račak. That was in fact a clash between Serbian police and military and local Albanian terrorists. The UN was by then involved in Kosovo, and UN pathologists were involved in examining that case, and some of them later confirmed that they were pressured by US men in that field, William Walker, to change their reports, and instead of reports about terrorists being killed, they started to talk about civilians being killed. They confirmed this many years later when damage was already done, but when such thing happens, truths always find a way. So that was used as a escalation argument by US and NATO, and on evening on 24th of March they began Operation Allied Force. They called it Allied Force. That was essentially an air campaign against Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. They also tried to have a land offensive against few Yugoslav army units in Kosovo that bravely defended our border in inhumane conditions, in conditions of an enemy air superiority above them, and that was especially in the Battle of Košare and Battle of Pastrik. That were the border outposts on Yugoslav-Albania border.
And the gathering that we met at today started at 12:44. Can you tell us what's the symbolism between the 12:44 p.m. over here?
Yeah, of course. UN Security Council Resolution 1244 was signed as a ending of the NATO aggression that basically guaranteed UN mandate over Kosovo, but also guaranteed Yugoslav and Serbian territorial integrity, and essentially forbid Kosovo separation and declaring of independence in any way. That was in June in 1999, and we saw in 2008 how West was actually able to forget what they signed. It is in Serbia, it is a symbol of their hypocrisy. It's a symbol of their lies, of their using UN as basically their playground for big powers, and we see it on global stage even today. UN is always talking about Palestine, and we see that they do essentially nothing to help those people. You know, Palestinians and many other nations are now experiencing what we experienced in 1999.
And I find it comical because NATO intervened because a so-called genocide was imminent in Kosovo. There's a lot more evidence of a genocide happening today in Gaza, and NATO is supposed to came to the defense of the poor Kosovo Albanians supposedly, but now we have people in Gaza under a complete siege and blockade with no food entering. No less than 50,000 Palestinians were killed. There's hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that are injured. Where is NATO in this specific case?
NATO is essentially an alliance based on lies. They began as anti-Soviet coalition, and when they finally managed to break down the Soviet Union, they started, especially during I call the darkest hour of humanity, 1980s, last decade of the previous century. That was essentially the darkest hour of humanity, where the US was able to interfere wherever they wanted in the world. They're trying to do that now with their allies, especially Israel. Israel is a dear child of the US, and they are using it on maximum level. Especially their hypocrisy is when Israeli leaders talk about Holocaust, they use suffering of their compatriots during the Holocaust to justify what are they doing now. This is especially tragic, especially evil that comes from them.
On March 23rd at 4 p.m., a large protest was held in front of the former location of the Ministry of Defense, and the protesters intended to march up to the Israeli and American embassy while stopping midway at the German embassy. At the German embassy, the protesters started chanting against the German government for forcing Serbia to extract lithium, which has been severely damaging the environment. The protesters were also condemning Germany for being complicit in the genocide in Palestine, as well as for fueling the war in Ukraine.
Free, free Gaza! Free, free Gaza! Israel terrorist! Israel terrorist! Israel terrorist! Israel terrorist! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Ajmo ovako, ko ne skače, da je šlapa. I ko ne skače, da je šlapa. I ko ne skače, da je šlapa. Nacisti, 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 nacisti.
The march turned out to be, in some way, a march for Palestine. And I think it makes a lot of sense considering right now, who are the people facing NATO, the entire force of NATO, who's been funneling all of its weapons to Israel. It is NATO member states. There's a line of police over here, Serbian police blocking access to the American embassy and the Israeli embassy. The protesters are marching on the street trying to reach the embassy, yet these police officers are coming to the defense of NATO. They're coming to the defense of NATO and stopping the protesters. Now, as we were walking to the Israeli embassy and the American embassy, the police blockaded the road leading to those two embassies, and that has severely angered the protesters. One of the protesters mentioned that in Serbia, you can protest anywhere you want in front of the Serbian parliament, the Serbian presidential office, but you cannot protest in front of the American and Israeli embassy, which definitely shows for who the Serbian government is truly accountable and loyal to. In 1999, going against international law, NATO went to the offensive and started attacking Belgrade, Yugoslavia, Novi Sad, Niš, Kosovo without due process, and it was an illegal invasion. Some would say that the Ministry of Defense behind me is a legitimate target, but how could it be when it defies international law? It was an invasion with no due process that was illegal under international law.